Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Sachin and Dr. Kino. It's been a pleasure, watching all these stalwarts of trauma, acute care surgery, uh, talking their experiences. And I would request all the speakers, whosoever is here, my fellow moderators, to open the cameras, and also the reactors if they're here, to switch on their cameras so that we can uh, interact with them, have a chat with them, so that our young, budding trauma surgeons and acute care surgeons all over Asia, and the attendance here is beyond Asia also, can benefit from their thought process. And once again, I must thank all the speakers on behalf of the Asian Collaboration for Trauma for having spared time at a very odd hour, because it's a variable time all over the world. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for staying with us for this open forum, in which we would like to have a more informal, interactive session for our participants. Thank you so much, whosoever is here, and I am seeing Dr. Karen Brazil, Dr. Salman Uranus, Dr. Andrew Peitzman, along with my chairperson, Dr. Orlando, and the scientific chair, Dr. Chumin Turk. We also have our vice chair, Dr. Raj Menon, along with Dr. Aquino and Dr. Mathur, who were the moderators of the day. Thank you so much once again, all of you, to be here. Well, we had a plethora of inputs today from real leaders of the trauma world, beginning with Dr. Fields. He probably had to leave, but he talked about balancing the whole act of being a surgeon, being an academician and academic surgeon, with his experiences and his pie charts, which actually intrigued me a lot on how to actually divide our time between our work. And he also said that most of the trauma surgeons would not have a work-life balance according to their expectations, which I agree partly, but definitely he had his own views. Then we had Dr. Rolf Coimbra, who's actually a team man, and he has been instrumental in fostering the World Coalition for Trauma Care, which is again a larger umbrella of all the trauma societies of the world. And he talked about teamwork. We talked about trust, conflicts, commitments, accountabilities, and then finally probably ownership of the issues. And then we had Dr. Karen Brazil talking about mentorship, and I can't forget that photograph of the turtle over the pole, which he showed, and she said that it requires a whole team of mentors and not only one mentor probably to do that. She also talked about the difference between mentorship and sponsorship. And then finally, we had Dr. Andrew Peitzman guiding us to what the future of trauma research should be, or what the future of how trauma should look 10 years or 20 years hence. Thank you once again. I would request both my moderators, if they had any questions pertinent to any of the reactors or speakers here, because these questions were answered by the respective speakers. But for the wider audience review, Dr. Aquino and Dr. Sachin, would you have any questions which you can direct to any of the panel members so that they can, try and answer those?
Sure. Thank you, Professor Gupta, for that. We have 3 questions in the Q&A for Professor Peitzman. So I was wondering if, Professor Peitzman, I could ask you these questions and see what your thoughts are. The first question is, what do you think is the first or most basic intervention to be done to decrease trauma deaths from road accidents in developing countries?
I think access to care, especially countries with large rural areas is simply aren't found soon enough and don't have access to care, and sort of broaden the net of trauma care. So if it's in a rural environment, you have people within the community, the area, the village that can give very basic care and then move up the trauma care chain. So I think in developing countries, you begin with very fundamental access, communication, and the basics, just the very basics. How to put a chest tube in, blood availability. So that's where I would begin.
Thank you. The next question is it a good idea for the police department to work with trauma doctors to develop interventions to curb traumatic road accidents? How should this go?
The obvious answer is yes. I mean, you look at that 50% mortality that is immediate, the only way we save those patients is to prevent their injury. So I think prevention is absolutely critical, and whether it's, gun safety or road hazards or whatever we can do to avoid the injury is absolutely critical, because we're simply seeing the end product. So if the injury never happens, then the patient's fine.
Do you think giving noradrenaline to keep blood pressure and decreasing crystalloid is acceptable?
So absolutely. So an interesting observation in both civilians and military is that mortality from hypotension begins at a systolic pressure of 105 or 110. It's not classically the 90 that we initially were taught. So I think I worry about patients even with what used to be normal blood pressures. And clearly hypotensive resuscitation, number one, is a good thing, because you're not popping the clot, as they say, and you're not exacerbating the bleeding. And then crystalloid not only causes that, but induces a profound hemodilution. And if you ever study those patients or look at uncontrolled bleeding and resuscitation in the lab, the hematocrits of some of those patients or animals is 5%. So you've compounded their shock with severe ischemic hemodilution. So crystalloid should be avoided at really all costs, and what the patient needs is blood, and that's what they should get if it's available.
Thank you. One question actually that I was thinking about when you put up your slide on the lethal triad that obviously we all know very well and teach to our residents and medical students. Recently I was reading about the so-called lethal diamond by including hypocalcemia into the lethal triad in terms of its influence on the various components of the lethal triad. And I think I read that there was potentially a US military protocol now that involved providing IV calcium to trauma patients early during the resuscitation to help potentially reduce mortality. What's your feeling about that, and do you think that that's where we might be going?
So it's funny how things recycle, because not that many years ago that was part of the standard resuscitation protocol. For this many units of blood, you give FFP, you give calcium, so it's back again. And yes, I think the data suggests we can make that part of the paradigm now, and certainly the data are clear. So I absolutely agree with that. And we've modified our protocol accordingly, as a matter of fact. I think it's just so critical. To me, the quantum leap in our system has been early delivery of not only blood products, but whole blood now to our trauma patients. So we're now studying that prospectively on the helicopters to get the same sort of data that we have for plasma infusion. And some services have already taken it to the ground transport arena. So I think whole blood, not only because of the coagulation benefit, but the immunologic benefit is really going to be one of the answers in the next couple of years. And I'm curious what the other panelists think about that idea.
Thank you, Dr. Paisman and Dr. Sachin. I think, Dr. Aquino, do you have any questions for the speakers? I think there is a question for Professor Karen, I think. Is it?
Yes, we have some questions here in the chat box. I think it's for Professor Brasso from Ajay Kumar. How Sobari windows, Sohari window actually work in team building?
I think that the Jabari windows help a team leader gain more information about the team, and when the team shares both their weaknesses as well as their strengths, the team learns more about each other and gets better, and learns the different skills that that team members have. And I think as a team leader, it is important to be oftentimes the first one to share and to self-disclose, both about your strengths or your interests, but also areas in which you might not have the greatest strengths, to give the rest of the team permission to say, hey, I'm really good at that. I would be happy to help. And so that's how I use the Jabari window. It is somewhat conceptual, but I think it's incredibly important and very important as a leader to model that.
I think in that case, it's very important to have a trusting relationship among the team members, you know, before we even apply that. I have another question for you from Lea Angelo Dobler. Can team leaders micromanage weak team members as a last resort? What if you have members of the team that are weak? And if not, if you can't micromanage, what would be the best course of action?
It's a really good question and really complex, and there's probably not one right answer. Dr. Coimbra talked about making sure that all of the team knows where the bus is going, and so that everybody can be aligned with the vision and be on the bus. And sometimes a weak team member needs permission to get off the bus because they either don't, they're not aligned with the vision, they don't have the time to commit, and as a leader, you can give them permission to get off the bus. If they are weak because they're new, because they need some skill development, then I think mentoring them is appropriate. If that's not the reason that they're weak, you micromanaging and sort of taking on their work is sending a bad message to the rest of the team. And that message you really don't want to send, because that will, as Dr. Aquino just pointed out, that will destroy the trust in the team. And so in that instance, that coaching that team member out of the team, off the team, and finding another setting in which they can be better aligned or better develop their skills is what you need to do, in my opinion.
I think, yes, yeah, I think Dr. Karen was right, that if you find somebody willing to get off the bus, I think at times they need a nudge and a push that, okay, fine, it's time now to get off the bus. Well, I had personally two queries. In fact, they were all for all of you, the leaders, the mentors, my own mentors sitting here. There are two things, you know. We're all told that youngsters and the younger generation learns from observation, and this includes our children and our residents and everybody who's looking up to us as leaders. And therefore, I come back to the point which Dr. John had made in his initial talk, that when you get slightly older and you're into leadership roles, at times you have to delegate responsibilities. You're not that much active clinically or in the OR. How would you actually still manage to engage the residents who are still observing you, but they observe you as somebody else and not somebody as probably you would want them to be? So how do you balance that? act, because ultimately they are observing you doing many things. And when you're at the low ebb and you're onto leadership position, you might not be doing that well clinically or that much clinically. So how do you sort of balance that? And I'll direct that question first to Dr. Peitzman, and then probably Dr. Karen can answer, and Dr. Mishra after that.
I did, and maybe then Andy can riff off my answer. Dr. Fildes mentioned that he still is clinically active, even though he is a dean and has many important responsibilities. And I think that's important. He's not as active. He doesn't take as much call as he used to. I think that's okay. But when he is, and he also made the point, when he is active, he is present. He isn't just a name on the call schedule and is sort of letting his chief residents do everything by phone and not in the moment. He is there. I have several partners who, even after they stopped taking call, they come to conference all the time. They read the papers. They remain present and active. I think that is very important because, as you say, the residents see what we do. I also think it is really important for them to see us take time away. And if you answer their phone while you're out running, or if you say, I'm sorry, I can't talk to you now because this is my time with my family. I think that they do. I actually don't like the term work-life balance. I like work-life integration, because balance makes it seem like it has to be balanced on a scale. And sometimes it's like this, and sometimes it's like this. I like integration better as a personal note. But I think it's important that they see us doing and choosing that integration.
So Karen, let me run with that. I think that's critically important. You have to talk the talk and walk the walk. And everybody sees that. And the other thing you are doing is leading by example, right? So you can show people without ever saying a word, this is my expectation, this is the bar. So I think that's important. I will say, I don't like the term work-life balance either. There is no such thing, right? It implies you take something from work and move it here, so that is a misapplied metaphor. I like work-life harmony better, but it's the same idea that there's no balance. You make a decision, it has consequences, and you deal with it, right? That's really the reality. And how you deal with that determines your happiness. The other thing that carry that theme is, if you're not happy with where your life is, you have to change it. I mean, that is an active process that you need to do every day, and you have to know these are the things I can't modify. And that early in your career, that's a bigger pile. And these are the things that I can, and the things that are modifiable, do something about it. Don't be unhappy. So I think it's really vitally important that it is an active, introspective process to make yourself happy. And I think if we're not having fun every day, we're doing something wrong. I mean, I really believe that needs to be addressed. And as a group, we have to take care of each other and protect our families and have that home time, the away time, where you really are safe. So I think my view is a little different than John's. The one thing that he mentioned that is essential is self-care. If you look at people who burn out, the first step back is always self-care. So do that up front and avoid the burnout. So.
And if I could say one more thing, I think as mentors and as leaders, sometimes when our trainees or our mentees say no or are tempted to make a choice that is putting themselves first, we write them off the list and we don't ask them again, because we will ask people who continue to say yes. There's a saying in academic medicine, there are a lot of off ramps and there aren't very many on ramps. And if people choose an off ramp for whatever reason, we don't invite them back. And I think that is, I think that's our responsibility as mentors and leaders. Ask again, promote again, sponsor again, up to a point, but we are responsible for the on-ramps for those who are choosing self-care.
Perhaps I can just say there that sometimes self-care is just getting back into the operating room. So for ourselves, self-care is doing a nice operation. And I also find that the younger generation are more likely to say no. So the millennials are less likely to be beholden to the surgical image of always being available, always working. They have carved out that right to say no. So maybe we can learn from them, is what I'm going to say. Some of our mentors should be our junior residents because we can learn from them.
Let the open house to an end. Thank you so much, all of you,